So, hello everyone. Welcome to the second workshop of the Hack the System, and this one is with Stellar. So it's going to be led by the Stellar team, Anke and Justin today. And this kind of links into the overall hackathon. We're in those kind of first 5 weeks for learning. And don't forget to book any kind of one-on-one support calls you'd like with myself and Anthony. And we're available throughout the hackathon if you need any support with advice on your project, advice on which challenges you should kind of enter, and anything really. So I'm going to send a Calendly link in a second with how you can book some time in my calendar. And also don't forget, we have some more events coming up next week. We've got the general introduction to blockchain session, introduction to blockchain coding with Lawrence from Extrapy on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we have the Skynet and Vega workshops. But without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Anke and Justin.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining this session. My name is Anke, and Justin and I will be hosting this workshop with you today. We're very excited to prep you for this hackathon. So to introduce myself, I work on community events at the Stellar Development Foundation, or SDF for short. SDF is a nonprofit organization founded in 2014 to support the development and growth of the open source Stellar network, which is what we'll be talking about today. So let's hop into the agenda. So first, we'll be talking a little bit about what is Stellar and how does it work. Then there will be an opportunity for you to ask some questions. So please write down your questions for you to ask then. And we'll also talk about some Stellar challenges that we'll have for you this hackathon. All right, after that, I'll give the word to Justin, and he will talk a bit about the tools and resources you'll need to start building on Stellar. And then afterwards, we'll have another question round. So let's hop in. So what is Stellar? Stellar is an open source network for currencies and payments. Stellar has no owner. If anything, it's owned by the public. The software runs across a decentralized open network and handles millions of transactions each day. Like Bitcoin and Ethereum, Stellar relies on blockchain to keep the network in sync, but the end user experience is more like cash. Stellar is much faster, cheaper, and more energy efficient than typical blockchain-based systems. So Stellar is not in and of itself a consumer-facing technology. Instead, it's used by businesses, which can then offer their users a fast and efficient network for trading, saving, and spending digital money. Their users, wherever they are in the world, can submit transactions to send and exchange all kinds of assets on the network, which deliver in seconds and for a low cost, as Stellar is free to use. So for builders, it's an open financial infrastructure. Anyone can access it. There's no permission or application needed. So let me show you a few things you can do with Stellar. So Stellar makes it possible to create, send, and trade digital representations of all forms of money: dollars, pesos, Bitcoin, pretty much anything. It's designed so that all the world's financial systems can work on a single network. Let's take a closer look at how this works. So Stellar allows anyone to create a redeemable, tradable representation of any asset in a few simple lines of codes. Often, we call these digital assets tokens. Token issuance is the backbone of the Stellar network. It's how Stellar connects the world's currencies, and it's what Stellar was built for. So you can issue a token that represents anything from corn bushels to gold to an hour of your time as a tutor, for example. But tokens are most useful when tied to fiat currencies, such as dollars or yuan or euros. So these fiat-backed tokens are issued by regulated financial institutions, money service businesses, or fintech companies called anchors, or what we call anchors. So anchors help create a world where the existing financial system is connected to and interoperable with Stellar. So they serve as the on and off ramps for the network. An anchor connects to a local banking system and handles regulatory compliance by doing things like collecting KYC, know your customer information, so that users can make deposits and withdrawals. A user obtains a Stellar network asset by depositing traditional currency with an anchor using traditional rails. They can then hold that asset in a Stellar wallet or app, use it to make payments, or trade it for other assets on the network. So anchors maintain fiat reserves equivalent to the value of issued tokens, so users can redeem them back to fiat anytime. So when people hold the tokens, they can treat them just like traditional money because they know that they're exchangeable for traditional money in the end. So next slide. Oh, that's my anchor. Forgot to click. So this might seem unexceptional. Issuing electronic credits in the form of a bank account for local currencies is basically what most banks do thousands of times a day. But in a global system, this one-to-one promise of a token for a currency has important implications. For instance, no matter how a USD token moves through the economy, the underlying dollars never leave that bank account in the US. So suppose someone loans their tokens to someone else who then uses them to buy a car. So no bank has to settle the purchase or approve the loan. Furthermore, it doesn't matter if the seller of the car lives in Mexico or Singapore or literally anywhere else. They can still own the tokens and trade them however they please. Stellar Network makes money borderless. So value on Stellar can be moved in 3 ways. The simplest and most common way to move value on Stellar is to make a payment. I send dollars, you receive dollars. So instead of sending value to another user, I can also trade an asset I hold for another asset on the network. I sell USD for euro. Finally, I can also combine the two into a path payment, which allows me to send one currency and have the recipient receive another. I send US dollar, you receive euros. So trades and path payments are possible because Stellar has a built-in decentralized exchange. So the decentralized exchange. In addition to tracking balances as Bitcoin or Ethereum do, Stellar also tracks and settles trades in a decentralized, ownerless way. It has a common built-in order books called the Decentralized Exchange, or DEX for short. So every token on Stellar is exchangeable with every other token on the network, and the Stellar protocol itself connects buyers and sellers with each other. So users can submit their bids or ask the public or asks to the public network via a simple single operation. And every ledger close, compatible trades will automatically resolve without the use of intermediaries. So the DEX facilitates universal currency conversion, which is not only great for traders, it's also great for cross-border and cross-currency transactions, called path payments that I talked about earlier, which allow a user to send one currency and have the recipient receive another. This is a powerful innovation for international payments. So now you know a little bit about what Stellar can do. How does it work? What's the tech behind it? So Stellar is a peer-to-peer network made out of nodes. And nodes are computers and servers that connect to and communicate with one another to keep a common accounting ledger and approve and ratify changes to it. So see that web of blue dots on this slide? They're all the nodes on the network. And so the network is open participation, which means that anyone can set up a node, and decentralized because nodes are run by independent individuals and organizations all over the globe. So these nodes, they keep a common ledger, which is stable, secure, and transparent. Stable because the network is spread over servers and computers all over the world. It doesn't rely on a central server, so it cannot be turned off. It's also secure because no one can change the numbers or manipulate the data to their liking. And transparent because everyone can see the ledger and trust that the information is correct. The ledger tracks ownership, what you own and what you do with what you own. So in essence, it's a public timestamped series of immutable records of data that stores accounts and keeps track of their balances and offers. And speaking of accounts, every entry that persists on the ledger is tied to a particular account. So accounts are the central data structure in Stellar, and they're saved on the global ledger. They hold balances, sign transactions, and issue assets. In fact, all entries that persist on the ledger are owned by a particular account. So account access is controlled by public and private key cryptography. Every Stellar account has a public key, which always starts with a G, and a secret key, which always starts with an S. The public key is safe to share. Other people needed to identify your account and verify that you authorized a transaction, kind of like how people need your email address in order to send you emails. But your secret key, however, is private information that proves you own your account. It's like the password to your email account, and you wouldn't share it with other people. So you use your secret key to sign transactions. Transactions can include operations like payments, account creations, setting trust lines, and more. Once signed, you then submit a transaction to the network to change the state of the ledger. So for example, when you want to make a payment, you submit a transaction that moves part of the balance from your account to someone else's account. On Stellar, every 3 to 5 seconds, the nodes on the network combine all the transactions submitted to them into a single transaction set and communicate with one another using a process called the Stellar Consensus Protocol to vote on the validity of that set. Once the nodes ratify a transaction set, it's applied to and changes the state of the ledger. Let's quickly walk through that process. So it starts with the ledger. Then Stellar users, wherever they are in the world, submit transactions to send and exchange all kinds of assets on the network. They can then move the funds anywhere in the world and convert currencies along the way, thanks to the built-in order books that I talked about earlier. So these transactions, they're bundled into sets confirmed by validating nodes and applied to the ledger, at which point they're final and irreversible. And the whole process starts over from here. So why build on Stellar? Stellar has some serious advantages that make it a simple, cost-effective platform for building financial products. One is speed. Transactions on Stellar are confirmed within 3 to 5 seconds. Another is cost. 1 cent can pay for around 100,000 transactions. Currency support. Transacting US dollar, euro, Mexican peso, Brazilian real, Argentine peso, and more. Or create your own digital currency for your specific needs. Compliance. Built-in features allow unified KYC, know your customer, and AML via partners and travel rule compliance. Developers tools, which Justin will talk a bit about later. Stellar's open source developer resources provide comprehensive documentation, SDKs, and tutorials. And global scale. Stellar is a global network that can expand the reach of businesses to new geographies and users. So, and it's also an open network. No one owns it, and anyone can access it for free. Instead, it's stewarded by the Stellar Development Foundation that nourishes the ecosystem and helps maintain the code base. So before I explain the challenges, I'd like to know if there are any questions about what I just explained. And you feel free to put them in the chat, and Justin and I can answer them.
Yeah, I think there have been a few in the chat, Anke. Are you able to read them?
Yes. I think, Justin, do you want to take the first one?
I'm just looking through because there's, in addition to questions, there's some additional chatter. So,
right.
So the first question is, so Stellar cannot function independently of banks. No, that's not true. Stellar can connect to existing banking rails in order to allow people to transact in real currencies and in order to allow people to move real currencies onto the network. But you don't have to use it in that way. It's open source, it's open participation. You can do anything that you want with it. You can issue tokens that have no bearing or connection to fiat currencies. And there's also a native network token called the Lumen that you can transact with automatically. There's a lot that you can do with Stellar, even if you don't touch banks. But what the point of the anchors is that Stellar has a native idiomatic way to connect to the real world, so that it doesn't actually end up relying on any particular exchange to onboard people. You can have local banks that help onboard people onto the network by giving them tokenized versions of their local assets, which is a powerful feature, but not a necessary one. Second question, who runs an anchor? Is it like BVDH? Yes, anchor services are run by generally by local fintech companies or banks or MTOs, people that have a license, a local license that allows them to transact in digital currency, and they handle compliance on a local level. So depending on where you are, regulations are different, but they will comply with local regulations in order to be able to accept deposits and tokenize them and put them and offer digital versions. So who runs an anchor? It is various different kinds of organizations of different sizes and scales, but they are generally regulated financial institutions. Stellar does not need banks to work. You could have an anchor on Stellar for Ethereum, for example. That is true. In addition to being able to set up an anchor service that connects to traditional financial rails, you can also tokenize an asset from, say, a different blockchain. So on Stellar, there are various anchors that offer Ethereum tokens, and you can essentially deposit Ethereum from the Ether from the Ethereum blockchain with those anchors. They will give you a representation of that ETH on Stellar that you can transact with on the Stellar network, and then at any point, same process, you can withdraw. Those crypto anchors generally are fully automatic, and a lot of the times, because of where they are, they don't necessarily require any KYC, but it depends on the anchor. Again, anchors live in a specific spot and comply with local laws and regulations. Are the market makers on the DEX registered legal entities? I'm not sure that I think that market makers on the, there are some registered legal entities that make markets on the DEX. Being a DEX market maker requires some expertise and capital. And so there are professional market makers who are out there trying to create the spreads and make profits off of them. And they are vital to the ecosystem. And those market makers act a lot like they do in any exchange. However, anyone can make markets. I mean, technically making a market is just putting orders on the books that instead of that persist, that other people can take. And you can do that with no registration, no legal, you don't have to be a legally registered entity in order to make a market. Looks like a lot of the answers that I'm giving have already also been given by other people in the chat, which is great. I would like to point out that that is actually something to keep in mind, is that like we're here, the SDF, we're here as a part of the ecosystem supporting the network, but a lot of people out there have a lot of knowledge about Stellar. There's a great enthusiastic community of independent developers and businesses that are building on Stellar. And a lot of the times you can turn to that community to find answers. So KYC. Someone's asking about transaction fees. The transaction fees on Stellar are determined by the network validators. The minimum transaction fee is determined by the network validators. Currently it's 100 stroops. 100 stroops is 0.000001 lumens at current, which is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a cent. So the minimum transaction fee on Stellar is quite low. And that is determined by network governance. Basically, validators determine where to set the minimum transaction fee. Now, if you start to play around with Stellar, you may notice that fees are actually dynamic. As network usage increases, fees become bids for an auction in a surge pricing protocol. It's pretty straightforward, and the fees are still quite low. But you do, basically when you submit your fee, you submit a bid, which is the highest amount that you're willing to pay, and higher bids make the ledger first. There's a limit on the ledger, which is also determined by validators. Now for this hackathon, you'll be building on the testnet, most likely. The testnet is a version of the Stellar network, but it's not the real Stellar network. The testnet doesn't connect to real value and also doesn't require real lumens. In fact, there's just a faucet called FriendBot that you can use to get free lumens to transact on the testnet. So when you're building these projects for the hackathon, you can afford to set your fees without worrying about any any connection or any real world cost to paying fees on the network, because you're just using the test network. What else?
Yeah, and
Let's
maybe
see.
some of these questions can also be answered with your when you show the developer tools, Justin.
Sure. Should I keep going through these questions? Is this helpful? There are a lot.
I think
Or should I just
maybe
start picking and
if
choosing?
we do the presentation and then maybe have another question section later on, where if people still have questions, they can repost them perhaps.
Great. Perfect.
All right, I'll move on with the presentation then. And then for any questions that are unanswered, if the next section has not answered it, please ask again. And yeah, Justin, feel free to add some in the chat as well. All right.
Yeah, sure. And great questions, everybody. I mean, these are really astute, which I appreciate. So
Perfect.
Great.
All right.
Take it away, Anka.
Yes, let me just close the chat so I can see. All right. So the challenges. So in partnership with Encode Club for this virtual hackathon, we've written up 3 exciting challenges to get you started building in this hackathon. So first, the entrepreneurial hack. The best project who've built a project, the best project, yeah, best developers who've built the best project on Stellar that solves a specific real-world problem will receive $3,000 worth of XLM or Lumens, which is Stellar native currency. There is also an API hack, right? Where the best app on Stellar that also uses third-party APIs, think of integrating with Google, Facebook, Shopify, or more, will receive $2,000 worth of Lumens. All right, and finally, the educational hack, where $1,000 worth of Lumens will be awarded to those who build the best implementation of a fun and gamified way to learn about Stellar. All right, so to say about the first, so build to impact people's daily lives. In this challenge, your job is to build a project on the Stellar test network that solves a specific real-world problem. So the best project wins $3,000 worth of Lumens that I explained before. And one example we wanted to show you is Uhuru Wallet. So Uhuru Wallet is a WhatsApp-based wallet that allows for sending intra-African payments. The Uhuru Digital Wallet will enable people to perform transactions such as person-to-person or person-to-merchant, cash in and cash out, utility bill payments, and even airtime purchases to allow for calling to a relative, for example. So they're currently active in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria, and are looking to expand in other countries in Africa. So one thing to note about Uhuru Wallet is, as most of their customers have low internet connection and low data storage on their phone, they've decided to build their app on WhatsApp. So that's a very creative usage of Stellar, which works perfect for their target audience. So another app I wanted to show you is Vibrant. So Vibrant is a dollar savings app that gives people in Argentina inflation-beating tools. Their easy-to-use platform lets Argentines buy and store digital assets backed one-to-one with the US dollar. Definitely something to check out. And another example we wanted to show is Dstock. So Dstock is a fintech company that uses buy and sell offers on the Stellar DEX to allow users to obtain stocks. So it's not only currencies or only fiat assets, backed assets that you can trade on the DEX. There's all kinds of value you can trade, including stocks, for example. So its goal is to make investing accessible and affordable for people in emerging markets like Vietnam and South Africa through a borderless digital interface for security tokens built on the Stellar network. So I highly encourage you to look into these 3 examples, and I think this deck will also be shown like later on, and this will also be recorded. So please make sure to check these out. And with the API hack, like you can think big and creative, like plug into the power of APIs. So in this challenge, your goal is to build an app on Stellar, on the Stellar test network that takes advantage of third-party APIs. Think big. A good example that I wanted to show is CoinQuest, which integrates with the Stellar network with Shopify to help online merchant and e-commerce shops programmatically accept and settle payments in new digital currencies while staying compliant. That's a really good one to check out as well. And finally, if you just want to build something fun and hack away in this challenge, you will build a fun, gamified way to learn about Stellar. Think quizzes, coding tutorials, and team building exercises, and more. So the best project here wins $1,000 worth of lumens. And a good example is Stellar Quest, which Justin will show a bit more about later. So building a project using a technology you don't know yet can feel like a lot. Don't worry, you don't need to start from scratch. We've collected a few very easy steps for you to become an expert in no time, and we'll provide you with all the tools and resources you'll need to start developing on Stellar. Starting with this guide. Make sure you read this guide, which contains all the information you need to start learning and developing on Stellar. To get you going in this workshop, Justin will explain some of the key tools and resources it mentions. So Justin, take it away.
Great, yeah. So I actually am going to just use the guide, which I hope is now showing up on the screen. This is the guide that we put together to sort of help you find your way through the Stellarverse. And as you can see, it's fairly structured. There's a table of contents on the left. At the top, it explains the challenges and the schedule, but I'm going to sort of skip down. When you first show up, if you don't know anything about Stellar, I'd spend some time in this how to get started section. It will go into some of the things that Anke talked about in her intro, and we'll give you a high-level overview of Stellar, which is a good way to just kind of like understand what it is and what it can do. Again, and this sort of response to the question that was asked, Stellar is finely tuned for payments, and it is designed to plug into the world's existing financial infrastructure, but it also is, you can build anything that you want on it. You don't have to just focus on a payment specific thing, because you can issue any kind of asset and use the operations native to Stellar to transact with that asset. But how do you do that? How do you figure out how to start building and how to issue assets and how to create an app that works on Stellar? And what are the resources that you use to do that? So for the next few minutes, I'm just going to walk you through this section here, which is the developer resources. So the developer resources. When you're building on Stellar, most people interact with Stellar via an API. There's an API called Horizon. It's very well tuned, it's very robust, and it's very well documented. And you, as you're building, can just use the Horizon endpoints to create your app or issue your asset or transact on the Stellar network. Since we're encouraging you to build on the testnet, you can use the testnet Horizon instance, which, as you can see here, is something that the SDF maintains. It's free to use. Here's what it looks like. This is just what it looks like when there is no query being asked of it. It's just like a list of certain fields that Horizon makes available. And we'll sort of show what queries look like in just a second. So as you build, you're going to be using the Horizon API to make your queries and submit transactions, most likely. But in order to figure out how to do that, it's usually helpful to start looking at the documentation. So first off, best place to start is the developer documentation. The developer documentation essentially has two different pieces. First, this piece, which is at just docs, stellar.org/docs. And as you can see, this is like a good, nice landing place for anyone who's showing up new to Stellar, trying to figure out how to build on it. And it's divided and navigable through this left-hand menu. If you check out where to start, you can see an introduction to Stellar and all the operations. These are the things that you can do with Stellar. But in addition to just sort of this high-level stuff, the most useful thing generally for people to do is to start with some of these tutorials, specifically the first 2 or 3. These will show you how to create an account on Stellar and show you the code to do it in various different languages. So you can come here to learn how to create an account, and you can come here to learn how to send and receive payments. Same thing, it will walk you through the process. These initial overviews are a good starting place, but once you're actually ready to build, there are probably 2 different things that you are going to want to do, at least one of these 2 things. The first is you're going to want to issue assets, and so you want to check out this section here, which will explain what an asset is, how to issue it on Stellar, how to publish information about it, how to control access to it. And all these walkthroughs will just sort of get you to the point where you can have that asset and be controlling it on the ledger quite easily. And then the second place where you might want to look is build apps. This is actually a specific it has an overview that talks about Stellar apps, but it also has a very specific tutorial it's in Stencil.js, but it will show you essentially how to initialize, build an app, and then you can walk through to add, not only to create a basic wallet, but to accept Lumen payments, to handle custom assets, and ultimately to deposit and withdraw with anchors. So looking at these docs, this is a great place to get your tutorials and to get going. And if you want to build an app, you can follow this tutorial. We're also giving it a workshop specifically about building apps in our next workshop, but this is a good place where you can do it via the docs right now. So that's the first part of the docs. The second part of the docs is the API reference, which is at developers.stellar.org/API. So like I said, when you're interacting with Stellar, you're going to probably be using the Horizen API, and this is its robust documentation. It will tell you how Horizen is structured, how you should make queries of it. It will walk you through all the different kinds of errors that you can get, so you can build queries, you can troubleshoot those queries, and you can find a lot of information if you're running into trouble here. This is all set up as a single page, right? And so one nice thing about it is if you can either scroll here if you're getting an error and find a result code for an error, but it also allows you, for instance, if you are hitting an error and it's transaction insufficient funds, you can search. You can just do a global search and find the error description, right? Transaction insufficient balance. And so it's a pretty easy searchable tool that will help you troubleshoot if you're running into errors. So again, that's the documentation, but I kind of want to go back to here because there's a lot in that documentation, and it's really designed to help people do everything that they can do with Stellar. For hackathons, to make this easier, since there's a limited amount of time, we also put together this repo, which is something you might want to look at. It is just, it has some boilerplate to do some essential things. Again, this is a stencil project, but you can sort of cut and paste the code here, and it will walk you through how to create some of the basic functions in Stellar. As you build on Stellar, there's more here that you can also explore under the documentation section. But as you build on Stellar, the next thing I kind of want to point out is that you will be using Horizen, the API, to build on Stellar, but you can also sort of use any language that you want to actually build your project. There's a section here with all the different SDKs. As you can see, JavaScript is probably the most common. I imagine we probably have some Python developers too. And if you come here, you can find the source for each of these SDKs, and you can download the latest release, and it will walk you through how to install the SDK. In addition, each SDK has its own docs and examples. So if you're building on JavaScript, you also can look here to figure out how to construct the actual JavaScript that you'll need to build your app. So that's kind of the overview. Use the testnet, use the Horizen API, use the Stellar SDKs. All of it's well documented. And so, as you're getting sort of your feet wet, you can poke around and see what's possible and how you can deal with it. There's a lot more listed here, but the final thing that I want to, the other two tools that I want to show you real quick are the Stellar Laboratory and Stellar Expert. So this is the Stellar Laboratory. As I mentioned, Horizen is the API that you want to use, and we sort of looked at a Horizen with no query here. But if you want to start building on Stellar, you can easily, this is essentially a wrapper around Horizen that allows you to understand how Horizen works and explore all the endpoints and even build and submit transactions using a clickable GUI, which is a pretty easy way to learn. As you can see right now, it's set up for the test network, which is what we want. And there are these different tabs that you can use to either create an account, explore Horizen endpoints, or build, sign, and submit a transaction. And so if you just come here on the testnet, for example, I can generate an account. And I'm just going to show you what's possible with the Stellar Laboratory. As I mentioned, on the test network, you don't have to secure lumens. You don't have to find a way to get real live lumens. Instead, you can use FriendBot, which is a lumen faucet, and it will give you lumens. And it's loading 3 to 5 seconds. My account is funded. So now that I have a funded account, I could build a transaction with it. And you can sort of come in here, put all of the various information for that transaction, select the transaction type from all the different kinds of transactions that you can submit, and then sign and submit that transaction. Or you can just explore the endpoint. So for instance, there's an account endpoint, and I want to look up a single account, and I'm going to look up the account I just made. which is, this is the public key for that account. So I'm going to explore endpoints. I'm going to look up the single account I just made. If I put that account in here, I will get the response that Horizen returns. And you can see the information about that account, and you can see that it has funding that came from FriendBot if you unpack this JSON. But part of the reason I wanted to show this to you is that the Stellar Laboratory will also manifest this, which is the actual Horizen query. So if you're ever trying to figure out how to use the API, you can look up the documentation, or you can come poke around in the Stellar Laboratory and find the query. And I just want to show you that now if I go to the Horizen and I append that endpoint and the right parameters that I just got from Stellar Laboratory, I get the same information from Horizen directly. So Stellar Laboratory is a great way to understand how Horizen works, to build sign, submit, transaction, and to explore the endpoints to get data from the network. And finally, the other thing that I want to show you is Stellar Expert, which is just the sort of premier blockchain explorer for Stellar. If you use other networks, you're probably familiar with blockchain explorers. This one works on both the testnet, which it's set to now, and the public network. And you can sort of, so again, I'm just going to search for the account that I just created in this search box, and I will get in the blockchain explorer the account and all the information. It will show me that there's just this one transaction, but you can search for anything. You can search for an operation, you can search for an asset, you can search for a transaction. So for instance, I just search for the operation or for the transaction where I find my account, and here I find all the information about it in Stellar Quest. I mean, Stellar Expert. I can also search for an asset code and find different assets. So here's a sandbox version of Anchor USD. And so as you're building, again, use an SDK, use the public instance of Horizen, learn how to use Horizen by reading the documentation and playing around with the Stellar Laboratory. And if you wanted sort of just a quick read on any transactions or accounts, you can also use Stellar Expert. I mean, all this information you can find from Horizen, but sometimes it's quicker to just use this interface. And so those are sort of some of the fundamental tools. And you can look through this whole thing to find a few more. There are several in here that I'm not going to get into that might be useful. Albedo, for instance, is a browser extension for key management. And I urge you to explore the Stellar ecosystem and ask questions later, because there are more tools out there so you don't have to build everything from scratch. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about is up in this Get Started section. If you are new to Stellar, one of the most fun and interesting ways to get started is to go through the challenges in something that we built recently called Stellar Quest. There are 2 series, and in each series, if you compete to win these badges. When these quests are live, you can actually compete to win lumens, but right now these quests have already ended, so you can still do them and you can still get the badges, but you're not competing for lumen prizes. And basically you can sort of read through how to log in. But the idea is that each series has a very specific task that you can achieve. So I think the first one is just create an account. And once you've done it, you come back and this web page, the actual interface will validate that you've done it correctly. And you can step through a series of sort of basic challenges that become more complicated as time goes on, which is a really good hands-on way to start to learn from zero and get pretty far in terms of your understanding of Stellar. And so I think that's, I think the advice generally is look around at those things that I showed and or start with Stellar Quest, which will point you to a lot of the same resources. And I think once you've done all that, you're in a good position to sort of start anywhere and build anything that you can imagine. And I'll stop there. So we still have some time for questions. Anka, is there anything else that you want to add before we jump into questions?
No, I think you mentioned everything that needs to be mentioned. I would urge people to really look at Stellar Quest. It's a really fun. Even if you don't have coding experience, you can still manage to do all the challenges, and it's a great way to get through all the Stellar documentation that Justin just mentioned. All right. Yes, Justin Rice is the greatest of all time. That's right.
Oh, thanks. I knew it. I always knew it. I knew there was something about me.
Right. Any other questions? Should we go through the questions then? How do you want to do this? Do you want to read them yourself? Should we read them out? What?
Yeah, why don't you pick some and read them to me, because I have not been reading the thread as I've been yammering on.
Let's see. Let's do some quality control as well. Is there a tutorial on best practices for implementing a custodial service without losing people's secret keys or leaking them? I mean, it's basically cryptography, but
no, we at SDF have not put resources into that. I gotta say, I think that one's up to you. There are just general tips that we have in that website, and in, you know, there is a guide in the documentation about securing, you know, that's sort of a very general how to secure web-based products overview, and it does outline best practices a little bit. But I think that part of the challenge in terms of, if I want to be a custodial service, what's the best way to do that, is that'd be a challenge for you. You know, you could, if you could figure out a great way to do that, it might be a key part of a cool app that you build as part of this hackathon.
Awesome. Are there any Stellar approved design assets that we can use while hacking in any of these categories? For instance, brand or style guidelines or image assets approved by Stellar for use with building the Stellar quiz or coding tutorial?
There is a brand policy that we have, and there are brand assets. So I want to just make a distinction that's important to us. Oh, I guess I'm sharing my screen. I guess I can stop sharing my screen so that I can try to look up some of this stuff. But Stellar Development Foundation is the organization that supports the Stellar Network. The Stellar Network itself is open source, open participation. We don't own it, right? So the brand assets that are most important to the Stellar Development Foundation relate to the Stellar Development Foundation. And so, you know, my answer is somewhat no, but I guess the real thing is, hold on. Can you hear me typing? Does it sound great? We do have a brand policy on our website, which I will link to here. And while I look for it, I'm sure happy to which you can consult. But I think the answer is, like, generally, I think you should be coming up with your own brand, to be honest. Most of the services and apps that are built on Stellar, like the ones that Anka showed, they generally aren't like Stellar whatever. You know, the tools that we showed that are about Stellar education are a bit about that, but most of the branding is about is someone trying to create their own brand, because consumers don't necessarily need to know that they're transacting on Stellar. I think for the education challenge, we can come back to you. I have a feeling that for the education challenge, there probably would make sense to use some Stellar branding, because you are talking about how the network itself works. But I'm going to post the brand policy in the chat, and I'll look for resources, and I'll share them in any other resources, and I'll share them in the Discord later. Sound good?
Awesome. There are loads of questions. I'm going to take the ones that come in more recently because I can see them, but we will get through everything. I have a question about creating an app. Can you go into more detail about starting it up and why the Stellar Ledger platform is important? What are the benefits of making an app using Stellar?
Great question. So the great thing about building an app on Stellar is that you can easily plug into this whole world of assets. So apps on Stellar can interoperate with all the different asset issuers in order to offer users access to those assets. And because they can easily access the Stellar decentralized exchange, they can also allow their users to make trades or make path payments. They don't have to build any of that out, right? The whole backend is sitting there, it's populated with assets. You can build an app and suddenly someone can hold USD in your app. You don't have to call anyone or get permission to give them access to that USD or the Argentinian peso or the Brazilian real or the Nigerian naira. And so that's the idea. It's a whole network that represents the world's currencies that an app developer can plug into with very little effort.
Very good. Is there an option for KYC collection inside the Stellar API, or are they run by third parties?
No, the Stellar network, you know, it's a blockchain network. It has to be lean because all the information that's kept on the ledger is shared across thousands of nodes across the world. KYC is a lot of information, and so there is no on-chain way to share or store KYC. And remember that the Stellar API that I was talking about, Horizon, is for accessing the network itself. However, there are a whole sort of separate set of concerns that we haven't really talked about, and they're called Stellar ecosystem proposals. And those essentially explain how to build extra network infrastructure And there are several, specifically one called SEP12 that explains how to set up a server that allows a client to transmit API information. I mean KYC information. So all those KYC transmissions can happen via these sort of standard servers that Anchor set up. Ultimately, the KYC check and the method for checking KYC, if someone needs to do it, is up to the regulated financial institution, the Anchor, that issues the asset, right? So short answer, no on-chain KYC. However, there is a protocol, SEP12, for exchanging KYC that allows a client to pass information to a server that then the owner of that server, an Anchor, can validate.
Awesome. Loads of questions. If I trade assets issued by Bank on Stellar, do I need to be subject to KYC and AML checks? Because there's a lot of KYC questions.
Yeah, generally no. So the answer is generally no. Most of the assets on Stellar can be traded without going through KYC. The moment when you have to go through KYC is when you withdraw them from the network. You also have to go through KYC when you deposit them on the network. So once you're on the network, generally assets are tradable without dealing with KYC. It's just the on and off ramps apply KYC. Now that's not universally true. If you start to explore, you'll see that there is a way to set an asset as what's called auth required. Auth required assets require the issuer to approve an account before it can hold the asset. The majority of assets on Stellar are non-auth required, so you can trade them without KYC.
Awesome. Right, a few questions that I'll just take quickly. This event is being recorded. We'll try and get it up as quickly as possible tonight. Yeah, and questions, can you do multiple challenges? Yes, you could do as many challenges as you like. You can include challenges together. Any specific questions, if you have any kind of niche ones, just ping me or George on Discord. Right, next. How does one become a node on Stellar Network?
I personally, I think it's outside the scope of this hackathon but basically it's an operational question. To become a node on the Stellar network, you download Stellar Core and spin up a Stellar node. You join the network. The process for doing that is also documented in the Run a Core Node section of the documentation. I do want to point out that Stellar is not proof of work, for instance, so you don't make money running a node. And Stellar operations, I don't think are what we're after in this hackathon. I think we're after building things on Stellar, not running a Stellar node. It's a fairly straightforward and well-documented process for people who are in the operations business. But look at Run a Core Node on the website if you're interested in seeing how to do it.
Awesome. Next question. Let's go. Get a bit better scrolling now. I've seen before that you don't have a PHP SDK. Why and how do you feel about someone building one?
I feel great about someone building one. The only reason we don't have one is it's not really in our wheelhouse at SDF. Like we maintain JavaScript, Java, and Go. And that's because those are the languages that we use in-house and that we have familiarity with. Those other SDKs that exist, Python, .NET, iOS, Ruby, those are actually created and maintained by people in the community, in other words, outside the SDF. Many of them get grants from the SDF to maintain them, infrastructure grants. And we are always looking for more SDKs, better. A PHP SDK would be great. There was one for a while, but essentially the maintainer lost interest, so it wasn't well enough maintained for us to keep talking about it. So a PHP one would be great. I'm pasting in the chat the Run a Core Node thing.
Awesome. Where are the best places to go for connecting with other Stellar-based businesses? For example, if I publish a Stellar.toml file on my website, how would I typically advertise that and find partners who should know about my assets?
Yeah, I mean, the best places to do that are to reach out via the community channels. So, Keybase, Discord. Keybase and Discord are the two most active places where there are community members. A lot of those people are other businesses building on Stellar, and so, one good way is to just start talking in those channels and see if anyone's interested. I'm pasting a link right now. You'll see that down there at the bottom, there's a place where all the different conversations happen, and I'd say Keybase and Discord are both really good. you know, this person mentioned a Stellar TOML file, which is that's a place where you publish information about your asset or about your Stellar implementation. And the other thing that you can do is you can take something like Stellar Expert, find the assets or implementations that you're interested in, and look at their Stellar TOML file, and they're going to have an email address on there. So you can also, in addition to just talking in the community, try direct outreach to specific organizations. Stellar Global, yeah, that's a great link.
Awesome. Is there a way to systematically generate keys with the Horizen API?
Yes.
Love that.
I believe so. Or actually, you know what? No, you wouldn't do it with the Horizen API. You'd do it with, well, yeah, Horizen, creating keys. There is a way to do it with Horizen, and I'm like struggling to remember exactly where it is, but yes, I believe so. And if not, you can do it with every SDK.
Another question here. TPS is capped at 10 or 10,000 operations per second, and are there any plans to increase this for global scalability?
The number of transactions per second, like all network configurations, is determined by the validators that run the network. So just as they vote to validate a transaction set, they say, hey, everybody, hey, other validators, where should we set the ledger limit, is what we call it. Currently on the public network, the ledger limit is set at 1,000. Validators can vote to increase it at any moment. If there's a need to increase it, they'll increase it. But remember that people who store a ledger, validators, that ledger, as there are more transactions, it gets more information, it becomes more difficult to store all that information. So their goal is to balance like the sort of costs of running a validator, and they also want to make it so that people can run a validator anywhere in the world, right? We don't want people to have to run specialized hardware to participate in the network. They need to balance that with network throughput. So at the moment, there's no reason to raise it above where it is. You know, they could arbitrarily raise it just to prove a point, but it's not pragmatic. So are there any plans? Well, again, I think that's a question for the network and not one that I, as just a sort of participant or supporter of the network, can necessarily answer. It's up to the validators.
Awesome. Is there a Java version of Polaris or only a Python version?
There's only a Python version. Polaris, by the way, is a reference implementation of an Anchor server. So one of the, to allow deposit and withdrawal, Anchors follow one of those Stellar ecosystem proposals, and Polaris is something we built to make that fast and easy, but at the moment it's only Python.
Awesome. I hope I don't, by the way, if I end up doubling up on any questions, let me know. I'm knee deep here. Are there any limitations when using different coding languages, or any advantages / disadvantages / functional differences in different languages? That is very general.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that more people use JavaScript than other languages. So sometimes it's easier to find support if you have a JavaScript question and you're asking the community. And I think Python and iOS are also, it's pretty easy to get answers. As you get into like something that fewer people use, and I'm trying to think, yeah, that's it. Functionally, the SDKs should all be able to do about the same things. But again, the ones that we, the SDF, maintains, which are JavaScript, Java, and Go, I can certainly vouch for those. But the others, like, I look in on all the time, and so like I know, you know, Python, .NET, iOS, they're solid too. So no big advantage.
There's a question here. Is this contest taking place instead of SCF round 6? I haven't seen any updates about this. Well, certainly this is a separate thing. This is run by Encode, so
yeah, separate thing.
That specifically, Justin.
Yeah, separate thing. So right now, the Stellar Community Fund is an ongoing grant program that we, the Stellar Development Foundation, a lot of Stellar three-letter SCF, SDF, SCP, that we run. And right now, there's currently an open round called the Seed Fund. What's going to happen for the next SCF? We realized that it makes sense for us to play out this current round, the Seed Fund, in order to figure out what we can learn so that we can actually take those lessons and improve the next round, rather than just jump-starting the next round in process while one's already open.
Very good. What next? I have no clue what this means, but you might. Is DSTOQ synthetic stock? Very good. How do you say DSTOQ?
DSTOQ.
DSTOQ synthetic stock, as trading US stocks are strictly regulated?
I believe D stock is anchored. In other words, the stocks that they have are 1-to-1, backed by actual stocks on some exchange. But I also don't know everything about D stock, and you can always just go to D stock and look at exactly how their product works. So that's the thing. Again, SDF is a participant in the ecosystem, and companies like D stock that are building on Stellar, we obviously we pay attention to them and we talk to them, but we don't know everything about them. So I think it's a good idea if you have questions about a specific application or a product built on Stellar, go see what they have to say. It's going to be much more accurate than anything I would say.
Next, NFT trading. NFT trading.
Can you do NFTs on Stellar? Is that the basic question?
I can't really answer questions. So let's do NFTs on Stellar. That's a nice one.
Sure. NFTs on Stellar. There are people that are currently talking about how to do NFTs on Stellar. And I'm just going to share a couple links in this chat. So there are some inherent difficulties, but it's not impossible. And there is a company called Lightmint that is deep in the NFT game. And you might want to check this out. Sorry, I've just got so many freaking links. So here's a blog that I'm going to share that has information on how they've done an NFT, which is pretty instructive, a good starting point if you're interested in NFTs on Stellar.
Very good. Some questions going around about chat about whether it's profitable to be a node operator.
No, it's not. Right. Stellar does not pay people to run nodes. So if you look at the way that Stellar is set up, the Stellar consensus protocol, it's not proof of stake, it's not proof of work. It is a Byzantine fault tolerance protocol that basically allows people to spin up a node, and in that node they choose other nodes that they care about, called their quorum set, and then there are rounds of voting where each of the nodes looks to their quorum set to validate transactions. There's no financial incentive to run a Stellar validator. Instead, the people who run Stellar validators do it for reasons that pertain to their businesses on Stellar. Either they want to support the network because decentralization is important and they're invested in Stellar, or they want to have a better you can use these public instances to submit transactions, but if you want a non-rate limited instance to have access to the network for an SLA for your customers, you might want to do that. And third, there's a reason that issuers do it that is a bit complicated and we probably don't have time for, called issuer enforced finality. But look at the run a node section if you want to have all these questions about running a node. Most of this stuff is covered in there. Yeah, Stellar is not like run a node and make money. That's not the way the network works.
Awesome. Are there any point of sale businesses that enable customers to pay using Stellar-based tokens?
Yes, CoinQuest. It was one of the ones. It was one of the examples that Anka gave, and there are others, but CoinQuest is a great one. They are quite. I'm grabbing the URL. It's actually a really good example of something that you can look at as you're thinking about challenges. There you go.
Awesome. Is there any boilerplate code for anchors besides Polaris?
No, not at the moment. Just Polaris.
There's so many questions.
There is boilerplate on the other side. Like if you look at the building apps section that I point in the docs that I sort of breeze through, you'll find that there is for the client side, so you can like easily see how to build a client that can consume anchor endpoints. But no, the Polaris is the only reference implementation for.
Awesome. Next question: when blockchains get big, won't validators increase transaction fees if it is costly to run the node?
Oh. That's a really good question for the network and for validators. But I mean, no, I don't see why they would. They're not paid by fees. Fees don't go to validators. So I don't think that there's a direct incentive for them to increase fees. I also want to point out, and this is something I mentioned before. Oh, and then I have to go, which is that fees on the network are dynamic. So go look at the Stellar fees doc. Fees are bids. As network activity increases, the amount that you'll have to pay in fees increases on the network. And there's actually a sort of blog post that we that I can share with you about fees. But again, I mean, I definitely understand all these questions about the how the network works or how validators work. But again, I would just urge anyone who's actually thinking of building something not to get too obsessed with Stellar operations. Build your app, build your service, think about your customers, make something cool.
Awesome.
And now I gotta go.
Should we wrap up then? Guys, if you want to continue the conversation, please head over to the Discord. I'm repasting the link in there. There is a dedicated Stellar channel for all of your Stellar-based questions. But thank you. I'll let George finish. I'm
stealing my thunder. Yeah, I think that is our record for the most questions asked. So looking forward to everything that gets built on Stellar in this hackathon. Yeah, don't forget next week we have events. On Tuesday is the introduction to blockchain. Wednesday is the Skynet and Vega workshops, and Stellar have their second workshop called How to Build a Stellar Wallet on Friday the 26th of March. I can post a link in the chat now. But yeah, other than that, let's continue the conversation on Discord, and thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Anke and Justin, for your time and answering all the questions, and have a good weekend,
thanks everybody
everyone.
for those great questions. We'll see you on Discord.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. All
Thanks.
right, see you at the next workshop.
Have a good weekend.
Bye, everyone.